The scoreboard takes 2 seconds to display the time, and those 2 seconds last longer than the entire race. When the numbers appear, the pool goes dead silent, then erupts. 24.97. Below my name, a world record. Her world record, taken from her by 2/100ths of a second, in front of 20,000 people, in a final she trained 6 years to win. I turn in the water, and she is already looking at me with a face I have never seen before. Then she does something she has never done in 6 years of racing. She pulls herself over the lane rope, cups the back of my head, and holds my forehead against hers. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from, and subscribe. Neither of us moved. We were breathing in each other's air. Her arm was still braced under my shoulder blade. My hand was still fisted in the fabric of her training shirt where I had grabbed her on the way down. Kai, she said. She said my name like it belonged to her. Nobody used my name like that. Not clipped, not cold, precise, the way she called the walls in a 200 butterfly. I said, you just held me under. She said, for 2 seconds. I said, in a swimming pool, between 2 national team athletes. In a hotel where every camera in the lobby is going to catch us walking out wet. She said, I know. I said, then why? Her mouth did something. It was not a smile. It was the muscle around a smile refusing to be one. Her fingers had not moved from under my shoulder blade. The water at that end of the pool was heated to just below body temperature, which meant her skin against mine was the exact temperature of the water, which meant the only place I could feel her was where the pressure was, which meant I could feel her everywhere. Answer the question, I said. She said, I heard about Melbourne. The pool machinery hummed. Somewhere far above us, on the 12th floor of a Phoenix hotel that was hosting the national team for the last 3 days of a training camp, my roommate Priya Callan was probably still awake with a book, and my coach was probably reviewing splits, and the 6 other swimmers on this floor were probably asleep or scrolling their phones or doing whatever people did between midnight and dawn during a training block that ended with the meet that would determine the world championship. Roster. None of them were in this pool. Sable and I were. And Sable had just said the word Melbourne, and I understood exactly what had brought her down here at 2 in the morning in a training shirt, with her hair still damp from a shower she had apparently taken and immediately regretted. I said, who told you? She said, Carolina. I said, Carolina should not have. She said, Carolina thought I already knew. Her jaw moved, small. The kind of small only I would catalog, because I had been cataloging Sable Ashford's jaw for 6 years across warm-up pools and ready rooms and press conferences in 3 different countries. She said, have you decided? I said, not tonight. Get your hand out from under my shoulder. She did, immediately. She stepped back through the water and put a body's length of space between us, turning herself into a silhouette I could not read, which was, I understood, exactly what she wanted. The reading being available for 1 second in the surface tension between us had been an accident, and she had corrected it the way she corrected everything. By adjusting the geometry, I climbed out of the pool and sat on the edge. Water ran off my hair and pooled on the deck tile in the cold blue LED wash. She said, from the water, I am sorry. For the hand. For the tackle. For coming down here at 2 in the morning. I said, not for holding me under. She said 2 seconds. I said, 2 seconds is a lifetime in this sport, Ashford. I heard her push through the water toward the ladder and climb out. She stood a few feet away with her arms crossed, water dripping off the hem of her shirt. I said, you tried and you still ended up in the pool holding me under. What does that tell you? She said, that I should have gone to sleep. I said, that is not what it tells you, and you know it. She held my gaze. In the 6 years I had raced this woman, I had never seen her look at me the way she was looking at me now. It was the first time she had looked at me and let me see her looking. In the cold blue light, her composure was doing something I had not seen it do before. It was not gone. It was working harder. The jaw, the slight tension in the way she held her arms, the stillness that was a hair too still. I said, go to bed, Sable. She said, are you taking Melbourne? I said, go to bed. She turned and walked out of the pool area. The automatic door hissed open, hissed shut. I sat on the edge of the pool with my knees against my chest and thought about the way she had said my name and understood that I was in trouble in a way I had not been in trouble before. I need to walk you back to before that. You will not understand the pool if you do not understand the 6 years. I am Kai Merrick. I am 26 years old and I have swum professionally for 8 of them. I am a 200 butterfly and 100 fly specialist with enough backstroke to be dangerous in a 200 individual medley if the day is right. I have made 3 World Championship rosters and 1 Olympic team. I have 4 World Championship medals, 3 of them silver. I have a bronze from the Olympics that is heavier than most of the golds in my sport, for the specific reason that I finished behind Sable Ashford in that final by 7/100ths of a second and had to stand next to her on the podium. While she thanked her coaching staff and her family and did not thank me, which was correct because we are not in the business of thanking each other. Sable is 28. Freestyle and butterfly. She grew up in a training program on the East Coast that produced 3 Olympic gold medalists in a decade, and she was one of them at 19. She is the current world record holder in the 200 butterfly. She is the reigning Olympic champion in the 200 butterfly. She is the reason my career, which by any reasonable measure has been extraordinary, is characterized in the sport as the story of a great butterflyer who happened to be born 4 years after Sable Ashford. I have never once resented that framing publicly. I have resented it privately every day for 6 years. Sable is the most disciplined athlete I have ever met. She is the most disciplined person I have ever met. She wakes at 4:50. She eats the same breakfast for 11 months of the year and takes exactly 1 month off in which she eats whatever she wants and then returns to the breakfast. She does not drink during training blocks, which for her is 10 months a year. She does not sleep with people she works with, which she has said publicly, and which I have never had reason to doubt. She trains 11 sessions a week and does 2 hours of dry land on top and reviews her own film with the attention of a general studying a border war. Everything she does on purpose. Which is why the tackle in the pool was such a piece of information. We have raced against each other in every major domestic and international meet since I was 20. I have finished second to her 23 times. I have beaten her twice. Once in a mid-season Grand Prix where she was recovering from a stomach virus, and once at a national championship 2 years ago in a semi-final where she was clearly saving something for the final, in which she beat me by 4/10ths. The public storyline is that I have been chasing her for 6 years and cannot close the gap. The truth, which only people inside the sport understand, is that I have been closing the gap steadily. The gap in that Olympic final was 7/100ths. The gap in the World Championship final last summer was 3/100ths. The gap in the 200 butterfly final I lost to her yesterday afternoon in the Phoenix pool was 0.03 seconds. The smallest margin of my career. She had beaten me by the length of a fingernail. She had climbed out of the pool without looking at me. She had done her interview with the pool deck reporter without saying my name. She had walked to the warm-down pool and warmed down for exactly 12 minutes and left. That is the Sable Ashford I had known for 6 years. The Sable Ashford who came down to the hotel pool at 2 in the morning to tackle me under the surface because she heard I might be leaving was not that Sable Ashford. Or rather, she was. But she was also something else, and I had been aware of the something else for approximately 8 months, in a way I had refused to give language to. The Melbourne offer had come in April. An Australian program that had produced the 2 current fastest sprint butterflyers in the world had extended an invitation for me to train with them for 18 months, with the explicit understanding that the goal was to prepare me for the next Olympic cycle out from under. In the words of the head coach on the phone, the shadow of the Ashford system. The Ashford system was not a system. It was Sable. But the coach had been polite about it. I had not accepted. I had not declined. I had spent 2 months turning the decision over in my head while I trained at the Colorado facility and Sable trained at the East Coast facility, and we saw each other exactly 3 times in that period at a national team camp, at a sponsor obligation, and at a documentary shoot where we had been asked to sit on opposite ends of a couch and answer questions about our rivalry. At the documentary shoot, she had been asked what she would do if I retired. She had said, "Kai will not retire before she gets what she came for." The producers had loved that answer. I had watched the footage back at home 2 nights later and understood that Sable Ashford had said the single most personal thing about me that anyone had said about my career in 6 years, and had said it into a camera to a national audience, and had said it with a face that betrayed nothing. That had been the moment I began keeping the list. The list was not a document. It was a running tally in my head, catalogued with the same specificity I applied to everything else in my training. Sable's tells. The things she did that did not look like anything to anyone else. The 1/10 of a second longer she looked at me on the pool deck than she looked at other swimmers she had beaten. The way she sat down first in briefings when I was in the room and moved to a chair with a clear line of sight to wherever I was going to sit. The fact that she had asked me, at that same documentary shoot, when nobody else could hear, whether the altitude at Colorado Springs was affecting my sleep, and I had said no, and she had said good, in a voice a hair too soft to be about training. I catalogued. I did not name. She catalogued. I could feel her cataloging. We had never touched. Not once, in 6 years. I did not shake her hand at the ends of races because we had established the ritual of nodding to each other instead, on the ready room stools, before we walked out to the blocks, and that nod had become the closest either of us came to physical acknowledgement, and the nod alone had come to carry a weight that 6 years earlier would have been carried by a handshake and a hug and small talk at the after-party. The pool, her hand under my shoulder blade, her arm at my ribs, 2 seconds under the water. I sat on the deck, and I understood that whatever container we had been using to hold 6 years of not touching had been broken. Not by the tackle. The tackle was the surface event. The container had been breaking for 8 months, and the tackle was simply the shape it broke into when it could no longer hold. I dried off. I put my hoodie back on over my training top. I gathered the pool cap and goggles I had brought down out of habit and had not used. I looked at the water for 1 more second, at the deck where Sable had stood dripping onto the tile. Then I went to the elevator. Priya was awake when I got back to the room. She was in the chair by the window with her book and a cup of hot water with lemon that she drank instead of coffee during training blocks because coffee did something to her sleep architecture. She looked up when I came in. She said, "Your hair is wet." I said, "I went for a swim." She said, "At 2 in the morning." I said, "I could not sleep." She said, "Anyone else in the pool?" I said, "Priya." She said, "Reasonable question." I said, "Sable was there." Priya set the book down. Priya Callan was 31 years old. She was a distance freestyler. She had been on 3 world championship teams and 2 Olympic teams, and she was, in the specific way that veteran teammates are, the most reliable emotional infrastructure I had. She read me the way people who had known me for 8 years read me, which was completely. She said, "Explain the wet." I said, "She tackled me into the water." Priya said nothing for a long time. She said, "Kai." I said, "I know." She said, "How did she know you were in the pool?" I said, "She did not know. She came down after she heard about Melbourne. She was probably going to knock on my door, and I was not in it." Priya said, "You are absolutely certain the tackle was not aggressive?" I said, "It was aggressive. It was also not what it looked like." Priya took a long sip of her water. She said, "You are going to have to tell me what you think it looked like." I said, "I do not want to." She said, "All right." She let it sit. Priya was good at letting things sit. It was one of the reasons we had shared rooms at every major meet for 4 years. She did not need every piece of information immediately. She could hold half a story and wait for the rest. She said, "Are you all right?" I said, "I do not know." She said, "Are you decided about Melbourne?" I said, "I was leaning yes this afternoon." She said, "And now?" I said, "I was leaning no from the moment she said the word." Priya looked at me steadily. She did not offer an opinion. That was not what her role was in my life. Her role was to sit in a chair with a book at 2 in the morning and let me arrive at the conclusion I was already arriving at without pushing me toward it. She said, "You should sleep." I said, "I will not." She said, "Try." I tried, I did not. Practice was at 7. We ate breakfast at 6. Practice was at 7. We ate breakfast at 6. Sable was in the dining room when Priya and I came down. She was at a table with her assistant coach and one of the sprint freestylers, eating her breakfast, working through what looked like split projections on a tablet. She looked up when we came in. She looked at me for a beat longer than she should have. Then she looked at her tablet. I sat at a table across the room. Priya sat next to me. She said, quietly, without looking up from her plate, "She looked at you like you owed her money." I said, "I know." She said, "That has been going on longer than you have been telling me." I said, "Priya." She said, 8 months. "Since the documentary shoot," I said. "You noticed." She said, "I have been on national teams with both of you for 6 years. Kai." I noticed the third time she looked at you. I looked up. Priya was still working on her yogurt. She was not looking at Sable. She was not looking at me. She had said what she had said with the calm authority of someone who had waited for me to be ready to hear it and had decided that today was the day. I said, "Why did you not say anything?" She said, "It was not mine to say. It still is not. I am telling you now because you appeared in our room at 2:30 in the morning with wet hair and the word Melbourne unresolved, and I am not going to sit here and pretend I have not been watching this for 8 months." I said, "She has never done anything." Priya said, "She has not done anything you would name. She has done a large number of things I would name." I looked at Sable across the room. She was talking to her assistant coach. She had not looked back up. Her jaw was set at the specific angle it set at when she had decided to focus and had allowed no distractions to persist. It was the angle I had watched from adjacent lanes for 6 years. It was the angle that meant she was going to swim fast. I said, "She heard about Melbourne last night." Priya said, "Ah," I said. "She came to find me. I was in the pool. She tackled me into the water." Priya set down her spoon. Priya said, "She tackled you." I said, "One arm at my ribs, one arm under my shoulder blade. Held me under for 2 seconds. We surfaced inches apart." Priya said, "Kai." I said, "She stood in the water and asked me if I was taking Melbourne." Priya said, "What did you tell her?" I said, "To go to bed." Priya looked across the room at Sable Ashford. Then she looked at me. She said, "You are going to have a very long day." Practice was at the meet pool. 2 lanes for the 2 butterflyers. 2 more for the freestylers. Coach Ekstrom was on the deck in the same blue windbreaker he had worn on decks for 15 years, holding a stopwatch he did not really need because the pool had automatic timing, and shouting split times at us with the same intonation he had been using since I was 20. Sable's coach was there. Her assistant coach was there. A few reporters at the back of the deck for the last training day before finals, keeping their distance the way reporters do at training when they know they are not welcome to interfere. Sable was in lane 6. I was in lane 4. Coach had us on the same interval, which was a decision that was either lazy or deliberate, and I did not know which. We were doing 3 by 200 butterfly at descending intervals, holding a hair-off race pace. It was a set designed to teach the body how to stay smooth under fatigue. She was faster than me on the first one by a body length. That was normal. She was faster than me on the second one by half a body length. That was not. By the third one, I was on her feet at the 75 and she felt me there, and she did the thing she almost never did. She went up. Not a full go. A push. And she still opened the wall on me by 2 seconds. I climbed out of the pool at the end of that set and my hands were shaking and my chest was heaving in a way that had nothing to do with the swim and everything to do with the fact that Sable Ashford had just felt me on her feet in a C training set and had responded like it was a final, which she did not do. Which she never did. Sable trained clean and raced hot. Everyone in the sport knew that. She had said it in 3 separate interviews. Coach Ekstrom said to me, "Nice work. Get water." Sable was in her lane still. She was pushing off the wall and coming back in an easy freestyle, cooling down. She did not look at me. I stood at the edge of the pool with my hands on my hips and I watched her swim, and I understood that she was not going to look at me on this pool deck today. She had come down last night. She had put a hand under my shoulder blade. She had asked me if I was taking Melbourne. She had walked out. And now she was here, in the meat pool, at 7:40 on a Wednesday morning, doing the only thing she knew how to do when the container was cracking. She was swimming through it. We had a break at 8:30. I sat on a bench by the deck with a water bottle and a towel over my head. Priya sat next to me for 2 minutes and then went to talk to Coach Carolina, who was Sable's assistant coach and a former backstroker herself and one of the small handful of coaches on the international circuit whose intelligence I actively enjoyed, came over and sat where Priya had been. She said, "She is furious with me for telling you." I said, "She should be." Carolina said, "I have known Sable Ashford since she was 20. She has not looked at anyone the way she looks at you. Not once in all that time. Last night she found out you might be leaving and she called me at 11:30. I could hear her breathing on the other end. I decided at that moment that the manage it strategy was going to kill her. I stared at Carolina. She said, "I am not asking you to do anything. I am telling you because you are the only person she is not going to be able to lie to, and I am going to spend the rest of my career hoping you know what to do with the information." She patted the bench and walked back to the deck. At 9, Sable and I did a pull set in the middle lanes, 12 by 100 with paddles and a buoy, holding a smooth stroke rate. We were close enough in the water that every third length we passed each other going opposite directions. She did not look at me on any of the passes. I did not look at her either. We swam next to each other for 1,200 meters and did not acknowledge each other, and every stroke I took I could feel the specific position her hand had held under my shoulder blade 6 hours earlier, and I could feel the water between us. Now, like it was the same water, and I understood that I was going to have to say something out loud before this day was over, or I was going to lose my mind in the shallow end of a training pool in front of my coach. At the end of the set, she pushed off first for a warm down. I gave her a 50 of separation. Then I pushed off and swam 6 easy hundreds behind her, watching her feet in the water in front of me. And by the end of it, I knew that I was going to knock on her hotel room door tonight, and I was going to tell her that I was not taking Melbourne. Not because of her, because of me. Because I had never wanted to take it. And she was the reason I had spent 2 months pretending I might. We finished. We got out. In the locker room area, she was on her way to the shower, and I was going the other way toward the coach's hallway, and we passed each other in a narrow corridor that had chairs against one wall, and the wall itself against the other. We had to turn our bodies to pass. She turned first. She stopped. She said, quietly, "Are you all right?" I said, "Are you?" She said, "I did not sleep." I said, "I know." She said, "Carolina told you." I said, "Yes." She said, "I am going to speak with her about her communication choices." I said, "I have already made that joke, Ashford. Get in line." Her mouth did the not smile thing. It was there, and then it was gone. She said, "When you decide about Melbourne." I said, "I have decided." She looked at me. I said, "But I am not telling you here." She said, "Where?" I said, "Your room, 10 tonight. After lights out for the team. If you cannot do it, tell me now." She said, "I can do it." She walked past me down the hallway. She did not brush against me. She did not touch me. She walked at exactly the width of the corridor's clearance, and she made it look natural, and that also was a piece of information. Between practice and lunch, I walked back to the hotel through the covered walkway that connected the meat pool to the lobby. A reporter caught me halfway across. Her name was Lena Voth. She covered aquatics for a national wire service. She was good at her job, and she was polite, and she was also, in the way that reporters at the very top of the sport had to be, entirely willing to ask the question you did not want to answer. Lena said, "Kai." 2 minutes. I said 1. she said. The Melbourne story is going to run in about 6 hours. I want to give you a chance to comment before it does. I stopped walking. The covered walkway was empty except for us. On the far end of it, at the door back into the pool, Sable had just come through with Carolina and a towel around her neck. She was looking at Lena. She was looking at me. She was reading the conversation from 100 feet away with the exact accuracy she brought to reading a competitor's stroke rate on a warm-up lap. I said, "What is the story, Lena?" Lena said, "That you have accepted an 18-month invitation to train in Melbourne beginning in September. That your representatives negotiated it in April. That the goal is preparation for the next Olympic cycle outside of the current American training structure." I said, "I have not accepted." Lena said, "Are you going to?" I said, "No." She wrote it down. I said, "Off record for a second, Lena." She stopped writing. I said, "All right, on record. I appreciate the offer from the Melbourne program. I have decided to remain with my current training structure through the next Olympic cycle. I have communicated that decision to the relevant parties this morning." She said, "You have not told the Melbourne people yet." I said, "I am doing that this evening." She said, "So I am about to break the story of your rejection of an offer before you have rejected it." I said, "You are about to break the story of my decision to stay. Which is the story I would prefer for you to break?" Lena looked at me for a long moment. Lena said, "All right. I will hold until the morning, but I need one more thing." I said, "What?" She said, "In the Colorado documentary shoot last November," Sable Ashford said, and I am quoting from my notes, "Kai will not retire before she gets what she came for. Do you want to comment on that?" I said, "Not today, Lena." She said, "When?" I said, "Ask me after the 50 butterfly final." She closed her notebook. She said, "You are giving me a lot of homework, Kai." I said, "You are the best reporter in the sport. You will do it." She left. She walked past Sable on her way out, and Sable nodded at her the way Sable nodded at reporters, which was neither warm nor cold and which contained no information. Sable came down the walkway. Carolina had peeled off. Sable was alone. She stopped about 6 feet from me. She said, "What did she ask?" I said, "About Melbourne." She said, "What did you tell her?" I said, "That I was staying." She said, "Did you say why?" I said, "No." She looked at me. She looked tired. It was the first time in 6 years I had seen Sable Ashford look tired. She said, "Thank you." I said, "I did not do it for you." She said, "I know you keep saying that." I said, "It is going to remain true." She said, "I know that too." She walked past me down the covered walkway toward the hotel without touching me, turning her body the width of the walkway required and no more. She went inside. I watched the door swing shut behind her. I went to lunch, I ate, I napped, I woke up. I did the afternoon session, which was recovery and drills and a little bit of pace work. Sable was on the deck for it and did not look at me. Coach Ekstrom pulled me aside for 5 minutes and told me my splits from the morning were the fastest of the block, which he had never said to me in the middle of a camp, which was a piece of information I filed under things to worry about later. I ate dinner with Priya and 2 other teammates. I said very little. Priya covered for me at points I could tell I was going silent by turning the conversation. I loved her, in that abstract 8 years of being roommates way, more than I had a way to communicate. I went to lunch. I ate. I napped. I woke up. I did the afternoon session, which was recovery and drills and a little bit of pace work. Sable was on the deck for it and did not look at me. Coach Ekstrom pulled me aside for 5 minutes and told me my splits from the morning were the fastest of the block, which he had never said to me in the middle of a camp, which was a piece of information I filed under things to worry about later. I ate dinner with Priya and 2 other teammates. I said very little at dinner. Priya covered for me at the points I could tell I was going silent by turning the conversation. I loved her. In that abstract 8 years of being roommates way, more than I had a way to communicate. At 8, I went back to my room. I sat in the chair by the window with my hair still wet from the shower, and I looked at the Phoenix skyline lighting up in the dusk, and I thought about the 6 years, and the 700ths, and the 4/10ths, and the 300ths, and the .03 and the tackle and the hand under my shoulder blade and the not smile and the fact that Sable Ashford had not slept last night because she had been told I might leave. Priya said, "You are going to see her." I said, "Yes." Priya said, "Do you want me to be here when you get back?" I said, "Yes." Priya said, "I will be here." I said, "Thank you." Priya said, "You are welcome." I went at 9:50. Her room was on the 14th floor. Mine was on the 12th. The elevator was empty. The corridor was empty. I knocked once. She opened the door. She was in the same training shirt she had worn to breakfast and dark pants and no shoes. Her hair was down. It was the first time I had seen her hair down in 6 years. She had always worn it up on deck and up in press conferences and up at the hotel bar during recovery drinks. Down, it was longer than I had assumed. It reached the middle of her back. Wavy from being contained all day. She had not planned for me to see it down. She had planned for me to arrive and had lost track of the fact that she had not put it up. She said, "Come in." I came in. Her room was a corner suite that the national team had given her because she was the national record holder and because the team gave the top athletes better rooms during training blocks. There was a small living area with a couch and a chair and a desk with her tablet on it, and beyond that a doorway to the bedroom. The lamps in the living area were on, the one on the desk, the one by the couch. She had arranged the room to be lit, but not bright. A person arranging a room for a conversation. She closed the door. She did not lock it. She stood by the door with her hands at her sides and she looked at me the way she had looked at me in the pool, which was not the way she looked at me on the deck, which was the version of her looking that she had been managing for 8 months. I said, "Do you want to sit down?" She said, "Do you?" I said, "Yes." We sat. She took the chair. I took the end of the couch nearest the chair. There was about 3 feet of space between us. It felt like a lot and not enough at the same time. I said, "I am not taking Melbourne." Her chest moved. "Once." She said, "When did you decide?" I said, "This morning, during the pull set." She said, "Why?" I said, "Because I did not want to leave in the first place. I have been telling myself I was leaning yes for 2 months while I was leaning no the whole time." She said, "Why did you tell yourself yes?" I said, "Because I was afraid of what it meant to lean no." "Why did you come to the pool last night?" She sat very still. She said, "Because if you left I would not see you again except in ready rooms, and I have been not seeing you outside of ready rooms for 6 years, and I did not realize until Carolina told me that the not seeing had been what I was doing on purpose to keep everything else in place." I said, "Say that again." She said, "I do not want to say it again." I said, "You are going to have to." She said, "The not seeing was on purpose, to keep the rest in place." I said, "What is the rest?" She looked at me. Her eyes were dark in the low light, and her face was still, and the composure was still working. But it was working thinner, and I could see the thinness. She said, "The rest is the part I have not been saying." I said, "Sable." She said, "I am not going to say it in this room. Not tonight." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because I have not slept and you have to swim the 50 butterfly semifinal at 10 tomorrow morning, and I am not going to give you a version of this that I have not thought about carefully. If I say it now, I am going to say it badly, and I care too much about how you hear it to give you a bad version." I stared at her. I said, "You are unbelievable. You held me under. You tackled me in a hotel pool and you have not looked at me on a pool deck all day, and Carolina is telling me things she is not supposed to, and I am sitting in your room at 10 at night, and you are saying you are not ready to say it." She said, "I am not ready. After the meet. After the 50 final. I will say all of it, in whatever room you choose, but I will not say the fragment of it tonight because you deserve the whole thing." I looked at her. In the low light, in her training shirt, with her hair down for reasons that had nothing to do with the decision she had made. She had shown up to this room ready to be asked the question and had planned to hold the line for 2 more days because she thought it was what I deserved. I hated her for it a little. I loved her for it a little. Both were pieces of information. I stood up. I said, 2 days. She said, 2 days. I said, you had better win that final. She said, I intend to. I said, so do I. I went to the door. My hand was on the handle. She stood too. She was 3 feet behind me. She said, Kai. I stopped. I did not turn around. She said, thank you for not taking Melbourne. I said, I did not do it for you. She said, I know, but thank you anyway. I opened the door. I went into the corridor. The door clicked shut behind me. I stood in the corridor for a moment and looked at nothing, and I understood that I had 2 more days of racing against a woman who was going to say the thing when it was over, and that I had to swim the fastest 50 butterfly of my life in the meantime, and that I was going to have to figure out how to do all of that while carrying the fact that Sable Ashford had shown me her hair down and had told me I deserved the whole thing. I walked to the elevator. I went down to the 12th floor. I went into my room. Priya was in the chair. Priya said, are you all right? I said, no. Priya said, sit down. I sat. Priya said, do you want to talk? I said, she would not say it. Priya said, why not? I said, she said I deserved the whole thing, and she was not ready to give me the whole thing tonight, so she was going to wait until after the 50 final. Priya looked at me for a long moment. Priya said, that is the most Sable Ashford thing I have ever heard. I said, I know. Priya said, are you going to survive the next 2 days? I said, I have to swim a 50 final against her. Priya said, you have to swim a 50 final against a woman who has been rearranging her entire life around not touching you for 8 months. Kai, you are going to have a very interesting race. I said, Priya. She said, yes. I said, she had her hair down. Priya was quiet. Then she said, oh. I said, yes. She said, sleep. I said, I will not. She said, try. I tried. I did not. I tried. I did not sleep. I lay in the dark and listened to the hotel hum around me and thought about the pool and the shoulder blade and the hair and the 2 days, and I did not sleep. And by the time the alarm went off at 5:45, I understood that I was going to have to swim a semifinal in 4.5 hours on. No sleep against a woman who was going to say the thing when it was all over, and I understood that I was going to swim faster than I had ever swum in my life. I got out of bed. Priya was already up. She was making tea. She said, did you sleep? I said, no. She said, neither did she. I said, how do you know? She said, look out the window. The hotel had a small courtyard with a lap pool for guests, a real 25-meter pool. In the dawn light, there was one person in it, swimming easy freestyle, length after length, Sable's hair, pinned again, at the surface. She was not training. She was moving because she could not sit still. I stood at the window and watched her swim. Priya said, she is going to be tired. I said, she is never tired. Priya said, today she will be. I said, so will I. Priya said, then it is going to be a very good race. I did not answer. I watched Sable turn at the far wall and push off and come back toward me, and I understood that the entire 6 years of my career had been leading to whatever race we were about to swim, and that no one in the building except Priya and Carolina and possibly Coach Ekstrom knew what we were actually racing for, and that I had never wanted to swim a race more badly in my life. I got dressed in the clothes I laid out the night before. Black training pants, a team polo, my hair pulled back into the particular braid I had worn for every 50 butterfly of the last 2 years, tight enough to stay put through the start and loose enough not to give me a headache. Priya watched me do it without comment. She had watched me do it 100 times and knew that morning routine was the one place I did not want conversation. I ate 2 eggs and a piece of toast and a small bowl of oatmeal and half a cup of black tea. I ate alone at a corner table the way I always did on semifinal mornings. Priya sat at the table, one over with her breakfast and her book. Sable was not at breakfast. She ate in her room on semifinal mornings. She had done it for 6 years. At 7, I went to the meet pool for warm-up. I got in lane 3 and did my warm-up the way I did every warm-up: 600s descending, 450s at pace, 225s above pace, 100 easy. I did not think about Sable. I thought about the water and the wall, and the angle of my hand on entry, and the tempo I wanted through the 50 meters of a 50 butterfly race, which was fast and clean and merciless. Sable came in during my 4th 100. I felt her get into lane 6. I felt her push off. I felt her fall into her warm-up rhythm, which I could distinguish from 20 other swimmers with my eyes closed, because it had the particular metronome quality that all top butterflyers have, and that Sable had more of than anyone. We warmed up in adjacent halves of the pool for 40 minutes and did not acknowledge each other, and I could feel her attention on me, the same way I could feel my attention on her. It was not a thing we could control. It was, at this point, weather. I got out. I toweled off. I put my parka on. I went to the ready room. The semifinal was at 10. Sable was in lane 5. I was in lane 4. The lanes touching each other are the lanes touching each other in a 50 butterfly. She would be inside my periphery for every one of the 22 seconds. The ready room at Phoenix was small. 2 rows of chairs facing each other, fluorescent lights, a whiteboard with the heat order and lane assignments, a cooler of water, the sound of the venue muffled by 2 closed doors. Sable came in 3 minutes after me. She sat across from me because that was the seat left. She had her parka on. Her braid was tighter than usual. She had her cap in her hands and she was folding it and unfolding it in her lap, which was the closest thing to a nervous habit Sable Ashford had ever displayed in a ready room in 6 years. She looked at me. I looked at her. She said, quietly, "Good luck." I said, "You too." That was all. That was every word we said to each other for the 20 minutes we sat in that room together, with 3 other semi-finalists between us, who were pretending very hard that they were not aware of a thing they were completely aware of. The volunteer at the door kept looking between me and Sable as if she was trying to memorize the 2 of us in the same enclosed space, because she was going to tell her friends about it later, and wanted to get it right. In the water, my peripheral awareness told me she was even with my shoulder at the 15, even with my hip at the 25, behind my hip at the 35. At the wall, she was inside my head and I was inside hers, and I did not look up until the water settled. The board said, Merrick, 25.24, 1. Ashford, 25.24, 1. We had tied. The pool went quiet in the way that pools go quiet when everyone in the building has just understood the story of the meet. She turned in the water. She looked at the board. She looked at me. I said, "We tied." She said, "We tied." We looked at each other 1 second longer than we should have. Then she reached over and, for the first time in 6 years, she offered me her hand. I took it. Her hand was warm and wet and slightly smaller than mine, and I registered the exact geometry of her grip, and I understood that I would remember that grip for the rest of my life. She let go after a normal amount of time. She pulled herself out of the water. She walked to her towel and her coach and the reporter, who was already coming down the deck with a microphone. I climbed out. I got my towel. I went to Coach Ekstrom. Coach Ekstrom said, "You did not go under fast enough on the second turn." I said, "There is no second turn in a 50, coach." He said, "There is now. Because you and Ashford tied to the 100th in the fastest semifinal of the year, which means the final tonight is going to be the fastest 50 butterfly ever swum in this country, and you are going to have to swim it like there is a second turn." I said, "Understood." He said, "Get warm down, eat, rest. I will see you at 4:30. I did all of those things. I did them in the order he had listed. I did not talk to Sable for the next 6 hours. She was doing what I was doing, in a mirror version, 1 floor up in the same hotel, and I could feel her doing it, and I understood that we were both preparing for the same 8:30 at night that was going to be the largest single moment of both of our careers. Priya, in the room at 3, said, "You have to tell me you are okay." I said, I am okay. She said, you tied Sable Ashford in a semifinal to the 100th, in a 50 butterfly. I said, Priya. She said, you are going to break her tonight, or she is going to break you, or both. Are you okay? I said, I am okay. I know what I am swimming for. She said, so does she. I said, I know. She said, whatever happens tonight, I will be here when you get back. I went to the pool at 5 for warm-up. Sable was already there. We warmed up in the same lanes we had warmed up in that morning. We did not look at each other. We did the same warm-up we had done at 7. When we got out, we walked past each other on the deck and she said, without stopping, without turning her head, ready room at 8:10. I said, I know. We went to our separate holding areas. We ate our separate small meals. At 8:10, I walked into the ready room and she was already there. And this time, we had 2 chairs open next to each other because the lanes had been redrawn based on semi-final times, and we were now in lanes 4 and 5, which meant we were sitting next to each other in the ready room instead of across. She was in her parka. She was folding her cap. Her braid was so tight her scalp was pink at the part. In the ready room before the final, we sat next to each other. The lane redraw had put us in 4 and 5, side by side instead of across. I sat down next to her. She did not look at me. I did not look at her. I said, quietly, so no one else could hear, after. She said, after. I said, my room. 11. She said, yes. I said, bring nothing. Say all of it. That is the whole condition. She said, yes. That was the entire pre-race conversation. We sat next to each other in silence for another 16 minutes. Every so often, one of the other finalists said something to try to break the tension, and it did not work. The volunteer at the door of the ready room, who was maybe 20 and was clearly a swimmer herself at some lower level, kept looking between me and Sable as if she was trying to memorize the two of us in the same enclosed space, because she was going to tell her friends about it later and she wanted to get it right. They called us out at 8:27. We walked in lane order. Lane 4. Then lane 5. She walked behind me. I could feel her walking behind me. On the deck, the venue was full and the lights were on and the water was blue and still, and the 8 blocks were lined up in the exact geometry that had defined every day of my professional life, and I understood in one clean moment that I was not nervous. I got on the block. I set my feet. I looked once down the pool. I bent. The beep. I have watched the tape of that race approximately 600 times. What I remember from the inside is different from what I see from the outside. From the inside, I remember the entry off the block being clean, and the underwater being long, and the surface break happening at exactly the point I had been drilling for 4 months, and then the first 10 meters being the fastest first 10 meters of my life. From the outside, I can see that Sable and I broke on the surface at the same instant, and that our first 2 strokes were mirror images of each other. And that at the 15 we were even, and at the 25 we were even, and at the 40 we were even, and coming into the wall, she was in the air a 100th before I was, and I put my hand on the wall 100th before she did, 24.97 and 24.98. She hit at 24.98. I hit at 24.97. The board took 2 seconds to display it because the timing officials had to be sure. When it went up, the pool made the sound pools make when a record breaks. The previous American record had been 25.14. My time was under Sable's world record by 2/100ths. I had broken the world record. I stood in the pool with my hand on the lane rope and did not move. Then I turned to look at lane 5. Sable was already looking at me. Her face was doing something I did not have a name for. Not upset, not celebration. The specific expression of a woman who had just watched the thing she had spent 6 years being the fastest in the world at pass into someone else's hands for the first time, who understood exactly who had taken it, and who was making a decision in real time about how to hold the fact. She held the fact by pulling herself up on the lane line and reaching across it and cupping the back of my head with her hand and pulling my forehead against hers, in front of the crowd, in front of the cameras, in front of every reporter in the building. She said, into the 2 inches between our faces, so quietly no microphone in the world could pick it up. "Congratulations, Merrick." I said, "Sable." She said, "Tonight." I said, "Tonight." She let go. She pulled herself out of the pool. The reporter came for her first, because the reporter was doing the responsible thing, which was going to the athlete who had just lost the world record. Sable did her interview. She said generous things about me. She said generous things about the sport. She said the record had been coming for 2 years, and Kai Merrick was the swimmer who deserved to break it. She said all of that with the composure that I had watched her use in 6 years of ready rooms and interviews. And she said it because it was true, and because saying it was the only way she knew how to metabolize what had just happened. And I watched her from the pool deck and understood that Sable Ashford loved me and had loved me for at least 8 months and had just lost her world record to me in front of a live audience and had, in the middle of losing it, cupped the back of my head with her hand. I did my own interview. I said generous things about her. I said the tie in the semifinal had been the wake-up call I needed. I said Sable Ashford was the reason I had gotten fast enough to swim this time, which was the truest thing I had ever said in an interview, and which the reporter took as generous but which was actually just accurate. We went to the medal ceremony. Gold around my neck. Silver around hers. She smiled at me on the podium. It was the first time I had ever seen Sable Ashford smile on a podium, and it was directed at me, and it was small and real, and it was in front of 20,000 people, and I could not do anything with it except stand very still and receive. We went to the mixed zone. I answered questions for 40 minutes. Sable answered questions for the same amount of time. I did not see her leave. I answered questions for 40 minutes. Sable answered questions for the same amount of time. I did not see her leave. I saw Lena Voth in the mixed zone at the very end of my rotation, and she came up to me with her notebook. Lena said, "You told me to ask you after the 50 butterfly final." I said, "I did." Lena said, "Kai will not retire before she gets what she came for. Do you want to comment?" I said, "She was right." Lena wrote it down. She said, "Anything else?" I said, "No." She said, "All right." She left. I went back to the hotel. I showered. I sat on the edge of the bed with my gold medal on the desk. It was 10:40. Priya was in the chair. She had not spoken since I had come back from the ceremony. She was reading her book. She looked up when I sat on the bed. Priya said, "She is coming." I said, "She is coming." Priya said, "I am going to sleep in Anna's room tonight." I said, "Priya." She said, "I already asked her. It is fine. She wants to help." I said, "Thank you." She said, "You broke the world record." I said, "Yes." She said, "I have not congratulated you yet." I said, "You have, in your specific way." She smiled. She put her book in her bag. She got her toothbrush. She left. She closed the door behind her softly, and I sat on the edge of the bed with my gold medal on the desk, and I waited. Sable knocked at 11 exactly. I opened the door. She was in dark pants and a soft gray sweater, and her hair was down, and she had no bag with her and no water bottle and no phone visible in her hand. She had, by the terms I had set, brought nothing. I said, "Come in." She came in. I closed the door behind her. I did not lock it. She stood in the middle of the small hotel room, and she looked at me, and the composure that she had held all night through the ready room and the race and the interviews was gone. Not broken. Gone. Set down somewhere between the elevator and my door. She stood in the middle of the room, and the composure that she had held all night through the ready room and the race and the interviews was gone. Not broken. Gone. Set down somewhere between the elevator and my door. She said, "You broke my world record." I said, "I know." She said, "I am so proud of you I cannot look at you." I said, "You are looking at me." She said, "I know." She sat on the couch. I sat in the chair across from her. Same 3 feet as the night before. Same low lamps. Different room. Different night. I said, "Say it." She said, "All right." She took a breath, looked at her hands, looked back up at me. She said, "I have been in love with you since a 200 butterfly final in Kazan 4 years ago. It was not the race, it was the warm down. You warmed down for 18 minutes, and I warmed down for 12, and you were in the lane next to me the whole time. And when you finished, you got out of the water, and you looked at me, and you smiled at me for the first time in the 3 years. I had known you, and it was not a competitor's smile, and it was not a professional smile, and it was the smile of someone who was seeing me. That was the moment I understood I had a problem. I said, "You never let me see you." She said, "I never let you see me, because if I had let you see me, I would have had to say it, and I could not say it, because the only version of my life I have ever been able to run is the one where every decision has one job and no leaks. And you were a leak I could not close, and I was terrified of what would happen if I stopped trying." I said, "So you managed it," she said. "I managed it. I managed it for 4 years. I managed it by never touching you and never talking to you outside of interviews and never sitting next to you on a plane and never getting on an elevator with you if there was a way to avoid it, and by winning every race I could win because winning gave me something to do with all of it that was not the thing itself." I said, "And then Carolina told you about Melbourne." She said, "And then Carolina told me about Melbourne, and I understood that if you went to Australia I would not see you again except in ready rooms. And I understood that the management strategy was not keeping me from making a mistake. It was keeping you from being able to know me. And you deserved better than the version I had been running." I said, "So you came to the pool?" She said, "I came to the pool. I think I thought if I could see you swim I could talk myself out of it. And you were already in the water. And I got in. And I put my hands on you. And I understood at that moment that I had not touched you in 6 years, and I had thought I had been managing something, and I had actually been starving something." I said, "You held me under." She said, "For 2 seconds. "I am so sorry." I said, "I am not. You held me under because you had run out of ways to not touch me." "I am not sorry," she said, Kai. I said, "Say the rest. The rest is what you are doing about it. Because I broke your world record tonight and you cupped my head in front of 20,000 people, and we do not get to walk out of this hotel like nothing happened." She said, "I am going to disclose to the national team medical staff and the coaching leadership that I have had a personal conflict of interest with a competing athlete for 4 years. It has not affected in-competition decisions, but it has affected my public statements and my professional judgment in adjacent contexts. I am going to ask them to review anything they think requires it, and I am going to do it in the morning." I said, "You have thought about this," she said. "For 8 months. I have known for 4 years I would have to do it eventually. The version of me that could keep it hidden forever is not a version of me I wanted to be. I stopped wanting to be her about 2 years ago. I did not have the courage to be someone else until tonight." I said, "You have thought about this." She said, "I have thought about this for 8 months. I did not know when I would have to do it. I have known for 4 years that I would have to do it eventually. The version of me that could keep it hidden forever is not a version of me I wanted to be. I stopped wanting to be her about 2 years ago. I did not have the courage to be someone else until tonight." I said, "What made tonight the night?" She said, "You did. You broke my record." I said, "That is not enough of an answer." She said, I know. The other part is that you told me you were not taking Melbourne. And you said you did not do it for me. And that meant you were making the decision on the terms I would have made it on if I were you, and it meant you were the person I have believed you were for 4 years, and it meant that if I did not stop managing this and say the whole thing to you tonight, I was going to spend the rest of my career watching you make the decisions I did not have the courage to make and telling myself it was fine. I looked at her. She was on the couch in a gray sweater with her hands in her lap and her hair down, and her eyes were wet at the edges, and she was Sable Ashford the way I had never seen Sable Ashford, which was to say she was Sable Ashford completely, without any of the containers she had spent 6 years using to survive the fact of me. I got up from the chair. I sat next to her on the couch. Not touching, close. I turned toward her. I said, I have been in love with you for a year. Since the documentary shoot. Since the line about not retiring. Since I watched the footage back and understood you had said the most personal thing anyone had ever said about my career, and you had said it into a camera, and you had not looked at me while you said it, and I understood that whatever I had been avoiding naming for 2 years had a name, and the name was you. She said, Kai. I said, so we are equal on the not saying it. We are equal on the managing. We are equal on the being afraid. That part is done. What I want to know is what happens now. She said, the plan is, I disclose tomorrow. I take whatever the disclosure costs me, which will be some visibility and some sponsorship, but not my spot on the team, which is not eligible to be affected because I have not made any decisions about your career and can prove it. Then, I train for the Olympic trials. So do you. We race each other in the open, which is to say the audience knows and we know and the people in the ready room know. Nobody in the sport gets to be surprised by us. I said, that is a plan. She said, it is not the plan I want. I want to sit on your couch and put my hand on your knee and stop pretending this is a negotiation. I want to have the plan happen around the fact that we are already in it, instead of the fact happening around the plan. I looked at her. I said, put your hand on my knee. She put her hand on my knee. Her hand was warm. She left it there. She did not move it. She did not try to make it into more than what it was, which was a hand on a knee at 11:40 at night in a hotel room after a world record and 4 years of not touching. I put my hand over hers. I said, okay. She said, okay. We sat like that for a minute. 2. Neither of us moved. The room was very quiet, and the hotel was very quiet, and outside the window Phoenix was doing whatever Phoenix did at that hour, and none of it was in this room. None of it. Just her hand under mine on my knee, and her breathing, and my breathing, and 4 years of pool decks between us being finally, fully, allowed to be over. I said, I am going to touch your face. She said, yes. I brought my other hand up to her jaw. I put my palm along the line of it, the same jaw I had watched from adjacent lanes for 6 years. My thumb rested just below her ear, at the tell I had been cataloging since Kazan. She closed her eyes, not because she was avoiding me, because she was letting herself feel the thing she had spent 4 years refusing to feel. I said, open your eyes. She opened them. I said, I want to kiss you. Once. Tonight. Because we have not slept and the disclosure is tomorrow and I do not want either of us to have this night be the night everything happens, I want tonight to be the night we start. She said, yes. I kissed her. Once. Slow. Patient. All the way through. Her hand under mine on my knee. My hand on her jaw, her mouth soft against mine in a way that 6 years of adjacent lanes had never let me imagine, and had apparently been quietly imagining anyway. It was the kiss of a woman who had been waiting for 4 years to be allowed to kiss the woman she loved and had decided, in the middle of finally being allowed, that the first one was going to be slow so that we would both remember it. We remembered it. I pulled back. Not far. An inch. She kept her eyes closed for a second longer. Then she opened them. She said, I am going to sleep in my own room tonight. I said, I know. She said, Because tomorrow is the disclosure, and I need to be able to say I did that clean. I said, I know, she said, but I would like to have breakfast with you at 7, at the corner of the dining room. I said, in front of everyone. She said, in front of everyone. I said, okay. She said, and after the disclosure, I would like to have a longer conversation about the plan, in whatever room you choose. I said, okay. She said, and I would like, if you are willing, to hold your hand under the table at the medal ceremony for the 200 butterfly on Friday. I said, Sable. She said, yes. I said, that is not a plan. That is a series of dates. She said, I know. I have never had one. I am figuring it out. I said, you are figuring it out fine. She stood up. I stood up. She looked at me for one long moment. She said, thank you for not taking Melbourne. I said, you are welcome. For real this time. She smiled. It was the second time I had seen her smile in the same night. It was the second smile she had ever given me. And it was directed at me, and it was small and real, and it was in a hotel room with nobody watching, and I received it the way I had received the first one, which was completely. She walked to the door. She opened it. She turned back. She said, I am going to be your girlfriend in a very disciplined way. You should know that. I said, I have raced you for 6 years. I know what disciplined is going to look like coming from you. Get out of my hotel room, Ashford. She left. The door clicked shut. I stood in the middle of the room with my gold medal on the desk and her taste on my mouth, and I understood that 4 years of adjacent lanes had just ended, and that the version of my life that came next was going to be swum, for the first time, in the same lane as Sable. I slept. I actually slept. For the first time in 3 nights, I slept. I slept. Actually slept. For the first time in 3 nights. At 7 I went down to breakfast. Sable was at the corner table in the dining room. The corner table sat 2. She had gotten there early and claimed it. She was drinking coffee. She had 2 plates in front of her, one for each of us, both with the exact breakfast I ate on morning after finals. She had ordered mine. I sat down across from her. I said, you ordered. She said, I ordered. Was I right? I said, you were right. Priya, from 3 tables over, without looking at us, gave me a small thumbs up under her table. The dining room noticed. The dining room noticed in the specific quiet way that dining rooms full of professional athletes notice, which was to say, nobody said anything and everybody saw everything. 2 of the sprint freestylers made brief, exaggeratedly neutral eye contact with each other. Carolina, from the coach's table, allowed herself precisely 1 raised eyebrow before she went back to her tablet. Coach Ekstrom walked past on his way to the coffee bar and did not stop, and did not look at us, and I could tell from the angle of his shoulders that he had already been briefed and had already decided that his job was to be the calmest man in the room, and that he was going to be it. Sable and I ate breakfast. We talked about the 800-meter freestyle heats that were coming up. We talked about Priya's chances in the 1500. We talked about ordinary things, and we did it in front of the entire national team, and neither of us pretended we were not sitting at a 2-person table in the corner of a dining room that had never held a 2-person table before this. Morning. At 8:15 she pushed her plate back and looked at me. She said, now. I said, now. She went upstairs and sat in a conference room with the national team medical staff and the coaching leadership and made her disclosure. It took 90 minutes. When she came out, she went to the pool deck and found me in the warm-down pool and waited at the edge until I swam to her. She said, they are going to review the last 4 years of my public statements about you and my recorded coaching interactions with anyone in your training network. They do not think anything will require action, but they want to be careful. I am on the team for the rest of this meet. I am on the World Championship team pending review. They asked me to disclose the situation to my agent before it is in the press. I have done that. Lena Voth is going to run the story tomorrow. It will be positive. I said, positive. She said, she read it to me. She was fair. She led with the record. She led with the tie. She led with the 6 years of racing. She mentioned the disclosure as an item of institutional accountability. It is a story about two athletes who are also in love. It is not a story about a scandal. I said, "You told her." She said, "I told her at 7:20 this morning. I did it before I did the disclosure to the team. I wanted her to have time to write it carefully." I said, "You have been very busy for 2 hours." She said, "I have been managing something for 4 years. I have a lot of catching up to do on doing it properly." I looked at her. She was on the pool deck in dark pants and the team polo, and her hair up in the tight braid. She had done in one morning what most people would have failed to do in a career, and she was standing on a pool deck like it was any other morning. I said, "Come here where I can reach you." She came to the edge. She squatted at the lane rope. I pulled myself up until we were face to face. I said, "Thank you. For every single part of the last 12 hours, the breakfast, the disclosure, the world record you lost to me by 100th, the kiss you kissed me like you meant it. Thank you." She said, "You are welcome." She reached, and she brushed a strand of wet hair off my forehead with her thumb, and she did it in view of two other national team athletes who were pretending very hard not to see, and she did not care, and I did not care. And it was the second time, in 12 hours, she had touched my face, and it was on a pool deck in front of witnesses, and she did not adjust the geometry to make it look accidental. She let it be what it was. She stood up. She said, "I have practice at 10:30. I said, "Go." She went. She walked down the deck in her dark pants and her braid, and she did not look back, and Carolina, watching from the coach's hallway, caught my eye and gave me a nod that was one of the small, perfect things I have received in my career from another woman who understood the sport, and I nodded back. I went back to my warm down. We swam the rest of the meet. On Friday morning I woke up and Sable was already in the dining room, and this time she was not alone at the corner table. Priya was with her. So was Carolina. So was one of Sable's oldest teammates, a sprint freestyler named Isolda Vega, who had been on national teams with Sable since they were 19, and who, according to Priya, had taken the news at 7 that morning with a 5-second silence followed by the phrase, "Well, thank God she has finally worked it out." I sat down at the table that had gained 3 chairs overnight, and Isolda, who had never spoken more than 5 sentences to me in 6 years, looked at me over her coffee and said, "You broke her record and made her disclose in the same 12-hour period. Impressive." She said my name with the small warmth of a person deciding to include me in something. I said, "I did not plan any of it." She said, "The best things are never planned." We swam the rest of the meet. The 200 butterfly final was at 7:40 Friday evening. I warmed up in lane 4. Sable warmed up in lane 6. We did our own routines. When she finished her warm-up, she looked at me across the pool once. I looked back once. That was the total of our pre-race communication, and it was enough. She won by 4/10. That was her margin of comfort in the 200. I had trained a race I knew would take me most of the way to her, and I had swum it exactly the way I had planned, and she had swum a race that had won her every 200 butterfly she had swum in 5 years, and the 4/10 at the wall was neither a surprise nor a disappointment. I climbed out of the water, and I looked at lane 6, and she was already looking at me, and she said, from lane 6, one word, without a microphone, that could pick it up, "Merrick." I said, "Ashford." She smiled at me, her 3rd smile in 3 days. I climbed out of the pool with the silver and understood that I had lost a race and I was fine, which was a new experience. The podium was at 8:10. Gold for her. Silver for me. Bronze for a woman I had raced for 4 years and respected completely. Sable was on the top step, and I was on the middle step, and we stood at national anthem height and looked at the flag, and the crowd made the appreciative sound. The Phoenix crowd had been making all week for a rivalry. It now understood the terms of. When the ceremony was over, Sable stepped down onto my step, which put her 3 inches lower than she had been, which meant she had to look up at me a fraction to say what she wanted to say. She took my hand. She did it in front of everyone. She held it at the height that had been designed to hold the frame of the trophy, but she held mine instead, and she said, into the space between us that no microphone could reach, "You swam a beautiful race, Merrick." I said, "You swam a better one." She said, "You are getting closer." I said, "I know." She squeezed my hand. She let it go. The photographers had their pictures, not the ones we had denied them. The ones we had, in that moment, allowed them to take. Lena Voth's story ran on Saturday and was as fair as Sable had promised. The review by the national team concluded with no action. Sable took a week off after the meet. So did I. We spent 3 days of that week in a rental house in the mountains outside of Denver together, which was our first actual time alone together as two people who were choosing to be in a house together, and it was, in a way I do not have language for, the easiest 3 days I have ever spent with another person. We did not change our training arrangements. Sable kept her East Coast program. I kept Colorado. We saw each other every 10 days on average during the training block, and every day during camps and meets. And we were public about it in the specific way that professional athletes are public about relationships, which was to say, we did not perform anything, and we did not hide anything. At the Olympic trials, I broke my own world record. She finished second by 9/100ths. At the Olympics, she beat me in the 200 butterfly by 3/100ths, and I beat her in the 100 butterfly by 2/100ths. We both took gold. She stood next to me at the closing ceremonies with her hand in mine in a way that did not need commentary. It was on every sports website in the world the next morning, and neither of us cared. That was the year we moved in together. Not in Colorado, not on the East Coast. In a house in the mountains outside of Denver that was between her program and mine, and required both of us to drive an hour to practice, and neither of us minded because we had both agreed that the drive was going to be part of the crane arrangement. On the first morning in the new house, Sable made coffee. She was in a soft gray sweater and her hair was down. She brought me a cup at the kitchen table and she sat across from me, and she looked at me the way she had looked at me in the pool at 2 a.m. in Phoenix. She said, "I still cannot believe you broke my record." I said, "I still cannot believe you cupped my head in front of 20,000 people." She said, "I was not planning to." I said, "I know. That is why it counted." She smiled. The 600th or so smile she had given me since Phoenix. I had cataloged everyone and understood that I had spent 6 years learning to read her jaw and her posture and her tells so I could beat her in the pool, and I was going to spend the rest of my life applying the same attention to the smiles she gave me over breakfast. That was going to be the second half of the training. Outside the kitchen window, the sun was coming up over the mountains. Inside, Sable Ashford was drinking coffee in her own kitchen that was also mine, smiling at me with her hair down, and 6 years of adjacent lanes had turned, without either of us being able to explain exactly how, into the same lane. I had swum for it. I had earned it. So had she. We had earned it together. That, in the end, was the only race that had ever mattered.